The story of casting people. Once upon a time there was a saint giant, who specialized in overseeing the casting and blacksmithing professions in the lower world. The saint often traveled in person to different places. Sometimes descending to this region, sometimes appearing in that country, becoming a mortal, to find ways to teach the craftsmen more about skills. But while monitoring vocational training, the saint noticed that among his disciples there were those who still committed crazy deception. Therefore, the saint must pay attention to curing their bad habits. There was a caster carrying around a pair of pots filled with all kinds of miscellaneous tools such as bellows, molds, scissors, pliers, briefcases, etc. His mouth occasionally calling out, "Whoever casts pots, casts lives, can lamps, gongs, reeds, incense vases, flower vases, turn old into new." Being proficient in his profession, whenever someone called, he only worked hard for a few days and was done. Then, when he had enough money to eat, he shouldered the burden and moved from one village to another. One day, early in the morning, the foundry was walking to keep up with the market. While walking, he suddenly met a young man, also shoulder to shoulder. When the young man saw him, he stopped and greeted him respectfully, then said, "Please allow me to ask a little. I have been studying with my teacher for several months now. Unfortunately, the other day, while going through the forest, my teacher and I got lost and searched for several days, but no one knew. I would like to ask you, have you met a man named Chu, in his 50s, tall and bearded?" The foundry shook his head. "I have never met anyone like that." Pausing for a moment, the guy continued, pleadingly, "It's so miserable. I studied with him for a long time and knew a little bit about casting, and wanted to learn more to become more proficient, but I didn't expect that he and I would go our separate ways. Now please allow me to follow you. I will bear the burden and serve you well. Just to learn the craft, nothing else. Do you have any compassion or condescension?" The caster at first looked at him with a look of naivety, but now when he heard that, he expressed disdain. He thought to himself, "If I go casting the street, I alone will be enough. Wherever I go, there will already be someone from the supplier. If only there was someone to help carry the burden, it would still be less tiring but my strength would still be good. It's not really necessary. Besides, if we get a few francs of salary, why don't we share it with the apprentices?" Ben replied, "I look like you're still young and inexperienced, your hands are still white and not burned at all. Learning this profession is not easy. Well, you better go back and plow." Hearing that, the guy clasped his hands and prayed, "I also know how to cast martial arts. Teacher, please let me follow. If you can't do it, or the service is negligent, then it won't be too late for me to send you away." Seeing him plead and pledge his loyalty to him, the foundry suddenly changed his mind and accepted. The young man changed his sadness for joy, bowed down and bowed to the teacher, then put down his tools, merged his burden with the teacher's burden, and then shouldered the burden to follow the new teacher. Before arriving at the market, a customer took the teachers and students home and hired them to cast a large-sized birthday cake. After the price fell, the teachers and students started building the mold to build the bellows furnace, struggling for several sessions to complete it. But through his work, the foundry realized that his apprentice was still very clumsy, as if he didn't know anything. Therefore, after leaving the owner's house, on the road, the molder scolded him. "I heard you say you knew martial arts, so I accepted it, but I didn't expect that you were just a piece of food." He did not expect that the apprentice did not show any shyness or embarrassment, just looked up at him and calmly replied, "Teacher, I followed my old teacher and learned a different way of casting." It's not like the teacher's casting method just now. The foundry was surprised and quickly asked, "What? How did you say you learned how to cast differently? Your teacher does not mold pots, pans, incense vases, or flower vases, but molds people. Molds old people into young people, molds bad people into good people." The worker thought he had lost his mind, so he was even more surprised. "Oh, what are you saying? I've never heard that before." "It's true, teacher. Casting is also easy, not too difficult or heavy. Only thanks to the molds my teacher left behind, I brought them with me." Having said that, he opened the mold to show the molder. While the teacher curiously looked at each strange mold, the student added, "Teacher, although I have just learned martial arts, it is very easy to do and makes a lot of money." Each trip he worked for was at most 4 years. But for each trip my old teacher made, he usually got 1 or 200 francs. The caster went from surprise to surprise, but seeing that he spoke honestly, he finally believed him a little. Then asked again, "Can you cast it yourself like you said?" "Teacher, my teacher once let me do it myself, so I can definitely do it." "So how does your teacher pitch?" "My teacher often preaches like this. Who wants to mold bad people into good ones? White skin and white hair into fair beauty. An 80-year-old man into a 13-year-old child. 70 molded into 17? Hearing clearly the beginning and end, the caster became even more curious. The foundry just wanted him to learn the trade right away so he could see it with his own eyes, so he told him, "Well, let me take a break from my work now, to see how you do business." "Wait a minute, keep advertising like that. If anyone wants to hire me, try making it for me. But remember, if anything happens, I don't know." From that moment on, the teacher left it to the students to announce and take care of everything. Arriving in a certain village, a rich man heard the announcement and immediately called in and asked, "What does 70 cast into 17 mean?" The young man replied, "Just like an old pot molded into a new pot. But this is a cast of people. Ugly turns beautiful, old and weak turns young and strong." The owner said, "I have an old man, over 70 years old, who has been very weak and has been paralyzed for several years. It would be great if he could be cast to be young and healthy again. But how much money do you get?" "I will charge you 150 francs, and food for both teachers and students. In addition, you must have 20 coal baskets, lend me a 30-barrel and prepare a closed room for me, where no one can peek in. If it can be done, 150 francs is not expensive, but what about a fatal burn? If I die, I will pay for my life. I will write a guarantee letter. For you." From the beginning, the molder closely followed the apprentice's work. He found him to be fluent. First of all, he asked for paper and pen to immediately write down the commitment. In the paper, he promised that if the job was not completed, he would not receive money, or if the customer died or suffered any injury, he would face imprisonment. Then he leisurely waited for the rice and water to settle in somewhere. He led the teacher into a closed room and took out a mold and molded it over and over again, showing and drawing little by little for the teacher. The job is done in just one session. The bung is placed on a red stove. Then, he took the old man into the room to strip and lightly beat him. The old man fell down dead. Without being confused at all, he put the old man's body in the jar, poured water in, and stirred it while drinking. After 3 days and 3 nights, the clear water became thick. Finally, he scooped up the water and poured it into the mold. Waiting for it to cool for 3 more days and 3 nights, he took out the mold. Sure enough, someone from inside gradually stirred, then stood up and walked out. His face still had the appearance of an old man, but his sunken cheeks turned into tight cheeks, and his white hair turned black. For several days, the cast member waited anxiously, only now to breathe a sigh of relief when the dead person has come back to life, healthy and young as advertised. The homeowner saw that his father was returned to life, and was overjoyed. He quickly brought and placed on the table 150 francs of money and many gifts, then expressed his thanks to the 2 teachers and students. The apprentice immediately gave half to his teacher. The foundry was so happy, he praised the young man to the fullest. In his mind, he thought to himself, "Even if it is not difficult to do, it will bring in a lot of money." But for a long time no one knew. The 2 teachers and students said goodbye to their host's house and left. Going to another village, a rich merchant called them in to hire them to recast his first wife, who had a hunchback and lost teeth. The work continued exactly as before. A commitment letter was written, a mold was cast, and the old woman was beaten to death and placed in a jar. But this time the caster was no longer nervous. He rolled up his sleeves and took over his student's job and worked hard to do everything. After 6 days and 6 nights of waiting, the mold was removed. Sure enough, the old woman transformed into a woman, making everyone admire and wonder. When taking the good coins given to him by the apprentice, the caster thought, "All the miracles are in that mold." Only thanks to the molds left by his master did he create a mess. Money. Ha! What a delicious job! Maybe even children can do it. Why not take it over and enjoy the benefits for yourself? Thinking so, one day as soon as he arrived in a village, the foundry immediately went to report to the village chief, accusing his apprentice of stealing several pieces of silver. The young man tried his best to argue, but he could not clear his name because when he opened it for examination, several pieces of silver marked with unknown reasons were lying in his statue's intestines. In the end, the village chief ordered him to be shackled and taken to the mandarin. The foundry then took all the tools and carried them away. He went to a faraway village and stopped, hired a caste member for a family. To reform, an old man over 80 years old. Imitating the student, he also made a good commitment letter, then took out the mold and painted it as he had been taught. When he brought the old man into the room, he also gave the old man a good beating and then started doing the same work as he did last time. But unfortunately, after several days and nights, when he opened the mold lid, he was startled because the water still did not solidify into a human. Extremely afraid, he tried to wait another 3 days and 3 nights but still failed. The old man's children couldn't wait any longer, so they broke down the door and entered. He was so scared, he begged for another 3 days and 3 nights. Another 3 days and 3 nights passed. Finally, when he opened the mold lid, he was truly desperate. The old man's sons rushed back, tied up the caster, beat him to death, and then put him in shackles to take him to the mandarin. On the way, with his neck in shackles and his body bruised from the blows, the foundry suddenly saw the punishment for his cunning greed. He is extremely regretful. With all his mouth, he prayed to Saint Giant, promising to forgive all bad habits, and asked the saint to let him learn the trade again to save him from death row. He mumbled and prayed for several days. On the third day, when he was being escorted by patrol from the commune to the district, he stopped at the shop to rest when he suddenly saw his apprentice sitting and drinking water at the shop. The caster immediately bowed down like a star, and asked his student to tiptoe and make a blessing. The student laughed and said, "I am the giant. I didn't expect your hearts to be so sinister. I should have punished the crime even more severely, but since I showed my remorse, I forgave him. You must take care to tell each other. Since you work in my profession, you cannot lie and deceive others. No matter how poor you are, your conscience must be clear." As soon as he finished speaking, in a flash, everyone could no longer see the student. But at that moment, from outside the door, one of the old man's children quickly walked in, saying breathlessly, "Stop sending people away. My father has come back to life and is now stirring in the mold." It is said that from then on, everyone who worked in casting was afraid of the holy giant. No one dares to cheat when practicing, especially when they work together. They never lie to each other. Thank you for joining us for today's fairy tale. We hope these stories bring joy and meaning to your day. If you love our channel, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any exciting tales. Wishing you a good night and sweet dreams. See you in the next story.